Well, greetings, everyone. Happy Sunday. It is about 11 a.m. on October 1st, 2023. We are beginning a presentation today on a very special subject. Actually, a lot of people don't know that in the exile of Baha'u'llah, before he ended up in modern day Israel, where we know the prison city of Akka, and after, of course, the beginning of his exile from Iran. And on that journey, he went somewhere. He went several places. He traveled over continents. He didn't just travel across countries. He traveled over continents. And there was an empire that existed at this time called the Ottoman Empire. This Ottoman Empire was expansive. It was vast. And this Ottoman Empire that existed, which now most people will ascribe to modern day Turkey, it had more than just Turkey. It was over many countries, modern day. And the beautiful thing about this is that we're going to be talking about the Babi and Baha'i religions in the Ottoman Empire. This very large empire that existed that is no longer around. Despite the genesis of the Baha'i religion in Iran, from very early on, important developments took place in the neighboring Ottoman Empire. This session today will provide the historical context of events in the life of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. The session will be mainly based on the analysis of documents, mainly at the Ottoman archives in Istanbul, Turkey. And Turkey is one of the former vestiges of this Ottoman Empire. Now, we are introducing today's speaker, Dr. Necati Alkan, PhD. He is a research associate at University of Bamberg, Germany, from 2015 to 2022. He is currently affiliated with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Israel. He has been fascinated by the Baha'i studies, especially history, since his youth, studying Islamic studies and history. Then at the university, this opened new vistas for Dr. Alkan by learning Arabic, Persian, and in particular Ottoman Turkish, beside his native Turkish and almost native education of German and English. He felt equipped to delve into Baha'i studies. Since 2001, he's been publishing about various topics, and his main and real breakthrough achievement in his MA thesis is about the relationship of the Baha'i faith to Islamic reform movements in the 19th century. He wrote this in 1998. And in a more deepened and extended fashion, his PhD thesis in 2004 was about the Babis and Baha'is in the Ottoman Empire and Turkey between 1844 and the 1920s. He has, of course, published since then, and in 2008, he published it revised with the title Descent and Heterodoxy in the Late Ottoman Empire, Reformers, Babis, and Baha'is. And you can find this on Necati, please jump in here to correct me. ISIS Press, Istanbul, 2008. If there's a long form to describe that, it'd be great.
ISIS Press.
ISIS Press.
But it's not that ISIS.
Different ISIS, everybody. Different ISIS. So in short, to describe Dr. Necati Alkan, he has done quite extensive study in the study of the Babi and Baha'i religions and their connection to the Ottoman Empire and the history of these religions in the Ottoman Empire. And as a specialist in late Ottoman history, Dr. Alkan is also the author of the most recent book, Non-Sunni Muslims in the Late Ottoman Empire, and Missionary Perceptions of the Alawis. You can find this in the publisher's library, IB Taurus / Bloomsbury, London, 2022. He published it. And having published widely articles and edited collections, and peer-reviewed journals, Dr. Alkan continues to build upon this library of his work on Ottoman history, which is phenomenal because, again, you don't really hear much about Baha'u'llah, the manifestation of God for Baha'is in this modern age, and his sojourn in multiple cities in the Ottoman Empire. And I say sojourn, I meant really he was exiled there. And that's ultimately why he ended up where he passed away and where Baha'is now go on pilgrimage. Lastly, Dr. Alkan had the honor and pleasure of serving at the research department at the Baha'i World Center for some periods. And he was visiting senior fellows at the chair in Baha'i studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So with that being said, I'd like to ask really quick before we start the presentation, Dr. Alkan, when you're saying you're affiliated with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Israel, do you still collaborate quite a bit?
Yes, the last thing I did was that for the last university year, they had online classes about the Babi and Baha'i religions in from history, from theology writings and so on. And I had 2 classes about the Ottoman context, which
and
is
there a way that people can join in these classes?
It was more for the students and some invited students and scholars from other universities, but for the next time, this year they don't do it, but I can ask if they do it next year, and then if it's okay, I can also announce it.
Yeah, that'd be splendid. We appreciate that. With that being said, I hope that this introduction did some justice to the subject. So later on when we present, I'm not going to go as in depth, but the premise is that people watching this video, this is our first video together. We welcome you, Dr. Alkan, for this presentation and the many more we look forward to having. So with that being said, welcome, and let us begin.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I will share my screen with you. Let me see. So welcome everyone. I hope you're okay. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Just let me know. Do you see my screen now?
We see your screen, and
okay,
now
great.
It's in presentation mode, so we're good to go.
Great. Okay. So thank you for inviting me. Especially thank you for Peter Terry and Violetta, who pressed me to present something. And I was hesitant last year due to some other issues, but I'm happy to present today and next Sunday, actually, another talk. So I'm happy to be here. You touched on a few things, John. The topic is vast, so what I'm going to do today is just really share some of the documents which give some context about the Babi and Baha'i religions from the Ottoman perspective. But before I start with that, let me just emphasize that it's really critical to know about the Ottoman context of the Babi and Baha'i religions, because I know, as you see here on the slide, we know the Bab declared his mission in 1844, and then he was active until his martyrdom for 6 years. And Baha'u'llah, being one of his first disciples in 1844 as well, he was active in Iran for 9 years as a Babi, if you will. And from that, after that period, he was exiled, as we know, from Tehran to Baghdad in the Ottoman Empire. So for about 40 years, Baha'u'llah was active in the Ottoman Empire, almost 40 years. And then we have also Abdul Baha, of course, who also was, his ministry was also almost in all of the Ottoman period until 1918, until the end of World War I. So it's really crucial to see this this fact, actually, and to have it in mind when we deal with Baha'i history. So You mentioned my revised PhD thesis. This is the cover of it. I'm basing my today's presentation on some parts of this thesis and a few other documents. What I will do is really talk about some historical events in Baha'i history based on Ottoman documents. This is just briefly the contents of my book, which I published in 2008, and after that I actually found numerous other Ottoman documents, and so my intention is to expand either this book into a big volume or just really
How can people find this?
This one, well, I mean, usually you order it through various bookstores online, or I have a PDF version and I can send it if you like, because the publisher allowed me and they send a PDF version, so I think I can share it and there's no problem in it.
Blended.
So
And more importantly, the publishers, I know I briefly mentioned them, but in case it's hard to spell or something, it's good that people can have access to also purchase them. I think that'd be a very good option.
Right, of course. Well, this is, books like this are like books print on demand, or I don't know if that's the correct print on demand. Yes. So either you buy it through, let's say, Amazon, or just to go to the publisher's website.
So it's available on Amazon
as well. Yes. In the United States, it's in hardback. In Turkey, it's still in soft cover. So you can check it. If not, just approach me. What I would summarize actually the situation of the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdul Baha with this quotation, which I have also in my book, from this Polish poet, who said many of those who were ahead of their time had to wait for it in not too comfortable quarters. So this is really what Babi Baha'i history is about, and so this quote really fits my research as well. I also want to share the view of the importance of the Ottoman context of Baha'i history from a respected scholar of Shia Islam especially, and from someone who has been doing Baha'i studies officially since 1999. It is Professor Moshe Sharon, who founded this Baha'i chair at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1999 together with the Baha'i World Center, and who was kind enough to host me for 2.5 years, as you mentioned, John, in 2006 to 2008, and then later on again a little bit. And I would like to read his foreword to my book, and please forgive me, this is not to boast myself or anything, it just shows the view of the respected scholar on Baha'i studies about the importance of the Ottoman context of Baha'i history. So basically, what he says is the 19th century witnessed an unusual eruption of religions and religious movements in the West, as well as in the East. While the Mormons, the various Adventist movements in the United States, and to a lesser extent the Templars in Germany are the most obvious examples of the modern religious activity in the West, the appearance of the Babi Baha'i religions is the most important event in the world of Islam in particular, and in the history of world religions in general. Until now, the research of the Babi Baha'i religions was particularly concerned with the appearance and early development of the new faith in Qajar, Iran. True, it has always been clear that the most important development of the faith took place after it had become Baha'i, under the leadership of Baha'u'llah, after the execution of the Bab in July 9, 1850. But a thorough and comprehensive research of this particular subject has been lacking until now. It was in the Ottoman Empire, while in exile in Istanbul, Edirne, and Akka, that the prophet of the new religion announced his claim to be the long-awaited Messiah, the manifestation of Almighty. It was mainly in Akka where he spent the last 24 years of his life, that he composed his most important works, particularly the most holy book. The latter part of the 19th century was an eventful period in the history of the Ottoman Empire, as well as the Iranian one. However, the Ottoman reform movement, which had gone through many vicissitudes, was far more violent and in the long run more effective than the activity of its Iranian counterpart. But in both cases, the Baha'i religion found itself drawn into an atmosphere of change and could not avoid reacting to it. True, it was a religious movement with messianic overtones, but its message, which wished to change the world, could very well fit into the reform atmosphere which prevailed particularly in the Ottoman Empire. A study of the interaction, mainly intellectual, between the activities of the reformists, the constitutionalists, and in general the whole Ottoman reform elite against the stormy years of the second half of the 19th century is long overdue. And Dr. Alkan fills this gap completely, basing himself on original sources and documents in 3 Oriental languages, Arabic, Turkish, and Persian, and particularly the documents of the Ottoman archives. Dr. Alkan elucidates the important issue of the interaction, positive as well as negative, intellectual as well as social and political, between the messianic message of the Baha'i religion and the messages and activities of the reformists in the Ottoman Empire, and to a lesser extent in Qajar, Iran. So as I said, please forgive me if I read this. It's not, boasting myself, but I just wanted to show you an outsider's view of this Ottoman context of Baha'i history. So basically what I'm using is mainly documents, official documents, state archive documents, from the Ottoman archives in Istanbul. I also utilize published Ottoman sources such as books, journals, newspapers, and of course the Baha'i writings, especially those of Baha'u'llah, where he addresses the Sultan or other Ottoman officials like the Suratul Haykal, Suratul Muluk, Lohe Rais, Suratul Rais, Lohe Fuad, all addressed to Sultan Abdulaziz and Ali Pasha and Fuad Pasha, who were his ministers, and which you can find in the Summons of the Lord of Hosts. And we have, of course, Abdul Baha with his Secret of Divine Civilization, which is, of course, addressed to reform in Iran, but could as well fit into the reform period in the Ottoman Empire. And then other tablets and letters, especially Turkish ones, to which I will refer in my next presentation next Sunday. And also Shogh Effendi in his God Passes By, which is regarded as the official Baha'i history. He makes mention of Ottoman history, of the Ottoman context, but in the Baha'i context, and also what we call sacred history. It's from the Baha'i view, from the Baha'i perspective, and also his Promised Days Come, which is an excellent historic analysis of events also in the Ottoman Empire and Iran. Then we have the World Order of Baha'u'llah and also Baha'i administration. So this is what especially makes the framework of my research. And now I want to also mention a little bit what the Ottoman Archives actually is and where it is. And so basically there were several buildings in Istanbul, which you see, and the oldest one is on the upper left corner in the 1940s, and then below that you see the Ottoman Archives building until the 2000s, where I went many times and had the pleasure of finding several documents. And at that time, the documents were not digitalized yet, as they are now. And then for some time, you see in the upper right corner, you see this, what's called the Sublime Porte, which was the entrance of the Ottoman government. It was called Sublime Porte because of this port, because of this gate, because it was high. So Babi Ali means the high gate, and the archives was located there until, for a few years, until 2013. which is also the seat of the governor of Istanbul, and the new buildings you see below since 2013. And you can still go there and see the actual documents, but nowadays they're mostly digitalized, and you don't get the real documents handed to you, but you can watch them on your screen, on your computer. But I had the pleasure of seeing the actual documents as well at that time, in 2000 and later on. The Ottoman Archives contains a collection of historical, especially social and economic sources related to the Ottoman Empire, of course. And as you said, John, the Ottoman Empire comprised nations whose territories one time or the other were part of this empire. We have the heartland, which is Turkey, and Asian and European Turkey. And then we have the so-called Middle East, Arab countries, Iran. There are also many documents related to Iran. We have EU countries like Romania, Hungary, Austria, which all of them were part of the Ottoman Empire, and all of the Balkans, the Caucasus, part of the Caucasus, Cyprus, and North African countries such as Egypt, Libya, Tunisia. And yes, and Istanbul from 1453 was the center of the empire and of official documentation. Now, Ottoman history spans 622 years. The early years from about 1300 until 1500, we have almost no official documents. There are many chronicles about the rise and events in the Ottoman Empire. And then from around 1451 to the mid-1600s, we have about 100 documents and few registers in the Ottoman archives. And systematic archiving began actually since the time of Suleiman I, who's known as the Magnificent, in the 16th century. So if the Ottomans did anything good, it was this archiving stuff, which they did. It's just amazing. From 1847, from the reform period on, we have the modern archiving system as a result of the so-called Tanzimat, the reforms, and the westernization. I will come to that later. But serious systematization was commenced after the establishment of the Turkish Republic in 1923. And with more than 100 million documents, the Ottoman Archives is the biggest archives in the world. The cataloging continues. Now almost all documents, if not most of them, are digitalized, as I said. And since the corona pandemic, the documents can also be viewed and downloaded online. The collections comprise bound notebooks and loose papers preserved individually or in larger files. The bound notebooks, which are called defter, are accounting reports, financial surveys for taxes and assessment and so on. And we have also a second class of notebooks which contain diplomatic records, copies or summaries of outgoing orders and other communications. And the loose papers, who are about 150 million in number, are original copies of imperial decrees to administrative reports and communications, and even odd notes of low-level bureaucrats. So maybe I'm exaggerating, but I'm always saying with this vast archives, you could probably write a daily Ottoman history. In addition to this collection, there are special categories which are called the imperial writs of the sultans, decrees, edicts, fermans, and also charitable foundation records. And beginning with the reforms of the Tanzimat period, Ottoman administration increased exponentially, and numerous central and provincial administrative authorities were created, and offices, all of which produced their own records. And even to this day, there are also like documents found somewhere and then brought to the Ottoman archives in Istanbul. Now, I cannot continue my presentation without mentioning these excellent people, excellent Baha'is who actually started finding Ottoman archival documents about the Babis and Baha'is. The gentleman you see on the left is one of the early Turkish Baha'is, Sami Doktoroğlu, who went to the archives in the 1970s and provided some documents to the hand of the cause of God, Hasan Balyuzi, who, as you know, wrote his books about the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdul Baha. And so Mr. Balyuzi mentions some Ottoman documents already in these books. And this couple you see they were professors of Iranian and Ottoman literature in Turkey, both Baha'i, and also they found also other documents and sent them to Haifa, to the Baha'i World Center. And Dr. Mujan Momen on the right, he was at that time the assistant of Mr. Balyuzi. He also used some of the documents in this famous volume, The Babi and Baha'i Religions, some contemporary Western accounts. So he mentions also a few of the Ottoman documents that were scattered in these books. Now, coming to the periods in Babi and Baha'i history, I must mention that even before his declaration, the Bab spent time in Ottoman Iraq in 1841 for 7 months in Karbala, attending lectures by Sayyid Kazim Rashti, who was at that time the leader of the Sheikhi movement. And also Baha'u'llah was exiled to Karbala in Ottoman Iraq before his official revelation, if you will, in 1851. Sometime before his revelation in the Siyah Jal in 1852. And then we have the minister of the Bab, of course, 1844, 1850. And I'm mentioning this to you because just to show you what the Ottoman documents comprise. They comprise all of Baha'i history until the passing of Abdul Baha. So we have a large file about Mullah Ali Bastami, who was the second leader of the living in Ottoman Iraq in 1844 to 1845. And this will be hopefully another presentation in January next year, I hope. It's an amazing story. And then we have, of course, Baha'u'llah exiled to Baghdad in Ottoman Iraq, 1853 to 1863, 10 years. And then his exile in Istanbul in 1863. And then his banishment to Edirne from 1863 to 1868 for about 5 years. And then, of course, the longest banishment in Akka from 1868 to 1891 for 24 years. And also later Abdul Baha also was active as the head of the Baha'i community. There are very few documents before 1891 in the time of Baha'u'llah, but later, especially from around 1900, I would say, the number of the documents about him increase. And just to give an idea, the Babi and Baha'i religions emerged in this period, what we just call Tanzimat, which is the reform period of the Ottoman Empire, from 1839 to 1867, 1876, 78. And then we have the post-Tanzimat period until 1908, until the Young Turkish Revolution, and then the Young Turk period from 1908 to 1918 until the end of World War I, and in which the Ottomans also lost the war and the empire. And we have several sultans who were on the throne, like from the time of the Bab to the time of Abdul Baha. We have Sultan Abdul Majid, which you see on the left side, and then his brother Sultan Abdulaziz, who is famous in Baha'i history because he exiled Baha'u'llah 3 times. And then we have a short interregnum of Sultan Murad V, very short, very ineffective interregnum. I will come to that later. And then we have for a long period, for 33 years, we have Sultan Abdul Hamid II, who also caused some trouble for Abdul Baha, and who announced the third reform decree, and then also established a parliament based on the first Ottoman constitution, which he later dissolved. It's a long story. We can deal with that later. And after Abdul Hamid was deposed by the Young Turks in 1901, his brother Mehmed V came to the throne. He was merely a puppet of the Young Turks, just representative, no power whatsoever. And then the last sultan was Mehmed VI from 1918 to 1921. And he is seen in Turkish history as a traitor and puppet of European powers. And in 1922, you may know Ataturk, Mustafa Kemal abolished the Sultanate, and the Sultan's family were exiled from Turkey. So again, just to give you an idea what the Tanzimat is, it's this reform period. As I said, literally it means reorganization. It was a period of reform in the late Ottoman Empire that began with the first reform edict in 1831, continued then with another second edict in 1856, and ended with the first constitutional era in 1876 to 1878. And the Tanzimat began with the purpose not of radical transformation, but of modernization, centralization, desiring to consolidate the social and political foundations of the Ottoman Empire. It was characterized by various attempts to modernize the Ottoman Empire and to secure its territorial integrity, actually, against internal nationalist movements by say, Serbians, Bulgarians, Greek, Armenians, and so on, and also against the external aggressive European powers. And the reforms encouraged the ideology of Ottomanism among the diverse ethnic and religious groups of the empire, and attempted to stem the tide of the rise of nationalism in the Ottoman Empire. The greatest outcome of the Tanzimat was actually the gradual secularization of the empire due to the replacement of religious law with secular law borrowed from Europe. And the reform period paved the way for the establishment of the secular Turkish Republic 100 years ago. Now we have a few comments by Shoghi Effendi about these sultans I just mentioned. I want to also share this with you just to give you the Baha'i perspective. Actually, the only one who receives a positive feedback is Sultan Abdul Majid. There Shoghi Effendi says, Imperial Turkey that had under Abdul Majid been admitted into the European concert and had emerged victorious from the Crimean War. And then coming to Abdulaziz, the sentence goes on, entered under his successor Abdulaziz upon a period of swift decline, culminating soon after Abdul Baha's passing in the doom which the judgments of God had pronounced against it. Again, about Abdulaziz, a conspiracy leading to a palace revolution, 1876, finally deposed him. A fatwa, which is a religious decree of the Mufti, announced his incapacity and extravagance. 4 days later, he was assassinated and was succeeded by his nephew Murad V, whose mind had been reduced to a nullity by intemperance and by a long seclusion in the cage. In the cage means actually like when a sultan was in power, he would put his nephews, sons, and whoever was male, he would imprison him in a palace, which was called the cage. And so they wouldn't be really concerned with political affairs or anything. They could not interfere into the affairs of the reigning sultan and so on. So Murad V was one of those. And Shoghi Effendi says, declared to be imbecile, he after a reign of 3 months was deposed, and was succeeded by the subtle, the resourceful, the suspicious, the tyrannical Abdul Hamid II, who proved to be the most mean, cunning, untrustworthy, and cruel intriguer of the long dynasty of Osman. The Committee of Young Turks secured, 1909, from the Sheikh al-Islam the condemnation of the Sultan, Abdulhamid II, deserted and friendless, execrated by his subjects and despised by his fellow rulers. He was forced to abdicate and was made a prisoner of state, thus ending a reign more disastrous in its immediate losses of territory. The end of so shameful a reign was but the beginning of a new era, which, however auspiciously hailed at first, was destined to witness the collapse of the Ottoman ramshackle and worm-eaten state. Muhammad or Mehmed V, a brother of Abdulhamid II, an absolute non-entity, failed to improve the status of his subjects. The follies of his government ultimately sealed the doom of the empire. The war of 1914 to 18 provided the occasion. And then the last quote, a new ruler, Muhammad or Mehmed VI, the last of the 25 successive degenerate sultans, had meanwhile succeeded his wretched brother. The edifice of the empire was now quaking and tottering to its fall. Mustafa Kemal, the later Ataturk, dealt it the final blows. Turkey, that had already shrunk to a small Asiatic state, became a republic. The Sultan was deposed, the Ottoman Sultanate was ended, a rulership that had remained unbroken for 6.5 centuries was extinguished. An empire which had stretched from the center of Hungary to the Persian Gulf and the Sudan, and from the Caspian Sea to Oran in Africa, had now dwindled to a small Asiatic republic. Constantinople itself, which after the fall of Byzantium had been honored as the splendid metropolis of the Roman Empire, had been made the capital of the Ottoman government, was abandoned by its conquerors and stripped of its pomp and glory, a mute reminder of the base tyranny that had for so long stained its throne. Such in bare outline were the awful evidences of that retributive justice which so tragically afflicted Abdulaziz, his successors, his throne, and his dynasty. So this is, of course, as I said, from the Baha'i perspective, and it's a sacred history. I will also, my intention is also to give you the Ottoman perspective of the view about the Babi and Baha'i religions. Now, the Babi and Baha'i related official records in the Ottoman archive comprise the early Babi period. As I mentioned, it's with the Bastami trial, which will be a separate talk. And then we have the exile decrees to Istanbul, Edirne, Akka, and Cyprus for Mirza Yahya. We have residency issues in those places, issues of travel allowances, money for the exiled ones, say Baha'u'llah, his family, Mirza Yahya and his family, and so on. There are issues of allowances and pensions, financial issues, and also documents about debts of Baha'u'llah in Edirne. We have documents about the conflict between Mirza Hussein Ali. It's actually usually the name of the actual name of Baha'u'llah is used in these documents. They don't say Baha'u'llah, they say Mirza Hussein Ali. So the conflict between him and Mirza Yahya and his fellow companion Isfahani are mentioned in those documents. Also, we have documents about the Babis that were left in Baghdad. And then we have documents about the fate of the Baha'i Ali Sayyah, who was exiled to Cyprus together with Mirza Yahya and Mishkin Kalam, for example. And then we have a legal report of murder of 3 Azalis in Akka in 1871, which will also be hopefully a separate talk next January. We have documents about the illegal Babi school in Akka and the Khane Awamid. It's about, it's saying like Abdul Baha established an illegal Babi school in Akka. We have reports about Babis in America / Baha'is in America. We have also documents about the second group of Western pilgrims in Akka and Haifa in 1899. And then we have several documents about the mischief, so-called mischief, as the Ottomans saw it, of Abbas Effendi of Abdul Baha in Akka and Haifa. illegally, they say illegally purchasing land from Arabs and selling them to the Jews to establish Israel. And then we have many documents also about the proposed exile of Abbas Effendi of Abdul Baha to Fizan in Libya in 1901. And here I have to thank my Baha'i friend Ufuk Celma from Turkey. I don't know if he's here. He was of immense help during the last years getting the digitalized images of those documents, actually, which I had so far printed as photocopies. But as I said, since Corona, it's possible to download those. And so we have about 200 files, I think, that comprise, that contain around 2,000 sheets, documents about Babi and Baha'i history, and they were all sent to the Baha'i World Center as well. And I'm also working, as I said, on another volume containing these documents. Yes, I mentioned that already. And actually, the largest file, which you now can read on the bottom, contains about 1,270 sheets, and it includes confiscated writings of Baha'u'llah and Mirza Yahya. And I will mention that later on. These are original documents, writings of Baha'u'llah kept in the Ottoman archives in Istanbul. So I will just briefly, as I said, just show you some documents, just to mention briefly the case of Mullah Ali Bastami, the second letter of the living in Ottoman Iraq, 1844-1845. So as you know, after his declaration and gathering of his first 18 disciples, the letters of the living, the Bab sent each of them off to propagate his claim without mentioning his name, actually. And he sent Mullah Ali Bastami to Najaf and Karbala in Ottoman Iraq. So Bastami approached the Shia and Sheikh clerics there and showed them portions of the Bab's first official writing, the Qayyum al-Asma. And the Shia clerics promptly rejected Bastami and the Bab's claim to be the Mahdi, to be the long-awaited Muslim Messiah, if you will. But Bastami had already convinced hundreds of people, and so he was deemed as dangerous. The clerics, Shiis and Sheikhs were they were fearful, and so they reported to the governor of Baghdad, Najib Pasha, about this danger, new danger, and so Bastami was detained, and reports was sent to Najib Pasha to Baghdad, and then later Bastami was taken to a jail in Baghdad. What Najib Pasha did was that he established a court to trial Mullah Ali on January 13, 1845. So this is really like the earliest documents we have. And the peculiarity of this court was that it was perhaps the first time that Sunni and Shia scholars agreed on the issue about a common enemy. And the Mufti of Baghdad at that time, the famous Sheikh Mahmoud al-Alusi, he presided over the court. At that time, he was actually not friendly to the whole case, but later on, when Tahiri appeared in Ottoman Iraq, we have records of Baha'i documents and books that this Mufti of Baghdad was friendly towards Tahiri. In any case, in the case of Mullah Ali Bastami, in this court, 20 Sunni and 10 Shia ulama, clerics, whatever, gathered, and they issued a religious decree, a fatwa about the Bab and Bastami. So what the Sunni clerics did, they said Bastami should be put to death, and also his leader. They don't mention his name. So the Babs, they should be put to death. The Shias opposed this, and they demanded that Bastami should be sent back to Iran. And Najib Pasha did not comply with any of those suggestions, but exiled Bastami with the order of Sultan Abdul Majid to Istanbul. So Bastami ended up in Istanbul for hard labor at the dockyard and died there in 1846. We have a brief description of Shoghi Effendi about him in God Passes By, where he says, with the Bab's return to Shiraz, the initial collision of irreconcilable forces may be said to have commenced. Already the energetic and audacious Mullah Ali Bastami, one of the leaders of the living, the first to leave the house of God and the first suffer for his sake, who in the presence of one of the leading exponents of Shia Islam had audaciously asserted that from the pen of his newfound master, the Bab, within the space of 48 hours, verses had streamed that equaled in number those of the Quran, which it took its author 23 years to reveal, had been excommunicated, chained, disgraced, imprisoned, and in all probability done to death. Now, these are some of the documents about the case of Bastami in Ottoman Iraq. And on the right, you see this religious decree, the fatwa declaring the Bab and Mullah Ali Bastami as heretics. This was studied many years ago by Mujan Momin. Actually, there's an excellent article about it. It's in Arabic. This decree, this fatwa is in Arabic. And Dr. Momin provides also the English translation of this and of the opinions of those Sunni and Shi'i clerics, which you see here, starting from the middle of the document. Each one of them wrote a brief note declaring the Bab and Bastami as heretics, and then you have to see below the note that you see their seals. Now, the other early documents are two letters of recommendation that were issued by the Ottoman embassy in Tehran in 1852 and delivered to Baha'u'llah, who was mentioned as an Iranian notable worthy of esteem and respect prior to Baha'u'llah's departure for Baghdad. These letters were issued by this Ahmed Vefik Bey, or Pasha, later Pasha, who was a renowned Ottoman statesman, diplomat, and writer who was envoy in Tehran at that time. And these two letters we have in one of the Baha'i World volumes. So now I will just follow the exile of Baha'u'llah actually to Baghdad. And so as we know, Baha'u'llah was thrown into the prison of Siyah-Jal in Tehran in 1852. Before that, there was an assassination attempt on Nasruddin Shah in August 1852. And this assassination attempt actually in 1852 is the key event which affected the relations between Iran and the Ottomans concerning the Babis and Baha'is. And as you know, in the aftermath of the assassination, so Baha'u'llah was suspected of being involved. He was imprisoned in the Siyah-Jal for 4 months, from August to December 1852 in Tehran. And here, as we know, as he states also himself, he received his first divine revelation, and that he was chosen by God as a new manifestation, but which he concealed for 10 years. But it's fact that after the Bab's execution in 1852, the Babis had already gathered around the charismatic person of Baha'u'llah and already had aroused the suspicion of the Iranian authorities. But Baha'u'llah's innocence was proved, and then he was released from the Siyah-Jal, but had to leave Iran for good with his family. So he chose Baghdad as the place of exile and left Tehran in January 1853. And as you also know, his half-brother Mirza Yahya, who was appointed by the Bab as his nominee and was officially, though ineffectually, the head of the Babi community, was also, he followed Baha'u'llah actually to Baghdad instead of doing his function in Tehran, being the head of the Babi community. So he fled also the 1852 persecutions of the Babis from Iran in disguise, only to join Baha'u'llah in Baghdad later. And so Baha'u'llah arrived in Ottoman Baghdad in April 1853. It was an arduous journey from Iran to Baghdad. And so we have 10 years of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad, which were relatively peaceful, except for the 2 years from 1854 to 1856, where he had this conflict with his half-brother Mirza Yahya, who was also having some claims for himself, and who was jealous that Baha'u'llah was the leader of the Babis. So Baha'u'llah retreated to Kurdistan in Iraq for 2 years. But apart from this, it was a relatively peaceful and productive period for Baha'u'llah. And I haven't found any document, because it was peaceful, I guess, because the Babis were peaceful in Baghdad until 1862 in the Ottoman archives, when the next banishment of Baha'u'llah was discussed in Istanbul. So back in Baghdad, as we know, he raised the morale of the Babi community, and also in Iran, sending tablets to Iran, where Baha'u'llah stressed the importance of ethical behavior and disapproving acts that would lead to social unrest. And Shoghi Effendi mentions actually that in God Passes By, that when Baha'u'llah was living as an exile in Baghdad, Sultan Abdul Majid, who was on the throne at that time, received positive reports about him from successive governors. And this friendly attitude of Sultan Abdul Majid unfortunately changed, because he died in 1861 and was replaced by his brother Abdulaziz, who became Sultan in the same year, in 1861. And so the rising popularity of Baha'u'llah actually among Ottoman officials and the population in general, among Iranian expatriates in Baghdad and in Iraq in general, frightened Iranian clerics and the Iranian consul general in Baghdad. So they sent alarming reports to Iran, to Nasreddin Shah, describing the reverence shown to Baha'u'llah by so many people in Baghdad. And this, of course, aroused the suspicion of Nasreddin Shah. In addition to this, the Iranians tried to discredit Baha'u'llah before the Ottoman government. The Shah ordered necessary measures to be taken by the Iranian divines and the consul general in Baghdad. But after the failure to discredit Baha'u'llah, more pressure was put on the Iranian government, and the consul general of Baghdad also dispatched false reports to Tehran and also to Istanbul. And considering the security of the Shah, because of this attempt in 1851, Iran stressed the danger of the Babi presence near the Iranian border. And these efforts actually, they bore fruit. Sultan Abdulaziz complied with the appeals, and pressure from the Iranian government, represented in Istanbul by the Iranian ambassador Mirza Hussein Khan. And so Sultan Abdulaziz decreed that the Babis in Baghdad be banished from there to Istanbul. And Shoghi Effendi says that the letter of the prime minister, the Ottoman prime minister, to the governor of Baghdad was couched in courteous language, ordered Baha'u'llah to the Ottoman capital as the guest of the Ottoman government in 1863. And this Iranian ambassador, Mirza Hussein Khan in Istanbul, he was extremely influential, also close to especially two Ottoman ministers, which you know from Baha'i history, to Ali Pasha and Fuad Pasha, who exchanged the offices for many years as prime minister and minister of foreign affairs. So these two pashas were also not friendly towards Baha'u'llah in general. And so the Iranian foreign minister instructed the Iranian ambassador in Istanbul to remove Baha'u'llah and the Babis from Baghdad. and to send them to a remote place. And the minister said that despite Baha'u'llah's removal from Tehran, he was still active in Baghdad with, quote, corrupting and misleading foolish persons and ignorant weaklings. The foreign minister accused Baha'u'llah of inciting murders and sedition. He therefore asked Hussein Khan, the ambassador, to press for his removal from Baghdad in order to prevent mischief by the Babis. So, and then the memorandum was actually sent to the Sultan, to Abdulaziz, proposing the exile of Baha'u'llah to Istanbul, and it was presented by the Prime Minister Fuad Pasha to Sultan Abdulaziz, where it says, I will read it, the text of this, it's the exile decree actually to Istanbul. So basically, it says some individuals from among the followers of the superstitious and secret sect named Babi, which emerged previously in Iran, had attempted some years ago an assassination plot against His Majesty, the valorous and successful Nasruddin Shah. Some of them were arrested and chastised, and some fled. One of them, Mirza Hussein Ali, came to Baghdad and is presently residing there. Although the Iranian state asked for and made a formal demand for his expulsion and handing over to Iran, because he is the leader of the followers of the aforementioned sect, the reply was given that the expulsion and extradition of the said refugees by force is incompatible with the Sublime States, Ottoman Empire's principles of benevolence and opposed to general international rules. Therefore, that request was abandoned. But because the presence of such a man in a locality like Baghdad and at the border of and the place of meeting for Iranian travelers and merchants threatens the security of His Majesty the Shah, and his removal to a place in the interior of the well-protected domains, the Ottoman Empire, of His Majesty the Sultan, far from the border, was brought forward for consideration. And although the Governor General of Baghdad, the Field Marshal of the Imperial Army of Iraq and Hijaz, His Excellency the illustrious Namik Pasha, put forward the argument that since this man, meaning Baha'u'llah and his followers, are of no harm whatsoever to the Sublime State, and the actions of the Iranians in those regions are in accordance with peace and amity, he was not in favor of their expulsion. And even though he recently conferred upon them the Ottoman citizenship, the Ottoman state, upon being in peaceful relations with a state, Iran, against whose emperor a plot was attempted by an individual, and because, in our opinion, the presence of persons accused of secret perversion and publicly known as agitators and violators of the law in the region of Iraq, which consists of various tribes and ethnic groups, is harmful, it is recommended to His Excellency, the above-mentioned Marshal, meaning the Governor General, that Mirza Hussein Ali and some of his companions be sent to Istanbul in order to be given a residence in a city like Bursa or Edirne. So this seems like one sentence, this edict, and actually it is, Ottoman Turkish is like, if you don't put punctuation, it's just one long sentence. So excuse me for that, but it's the style. So just to sum up this document, it basically says that the residents of the Babis, who some years ago had attempted to kill the Shah in places near Iran, posed a threat to the Shah, and hence the Ottoman government should interfere in this matter in order to maintain a peaceful relationship with the Iranian government. So then the Ottomans say, yet, however, the expulsion of refugees in the empire by force ran counter to Ottoman customs of benevolence, they say, the rule of justice and international regulations. Nevertheless, they say, it was dangerous that persons like Baha'u'llah and his followers should dwell in Baghdad, where he could stir up mischief among different groups of people and tribes. So at the bottom, you have the note of Sultan Abdulaziz saying that it is necessary that the matter of sending the aforementioned Mirza Hussein Ali and some of his companions to Istanbul, so as to make them reside at places such as Bursa and Edirne, should be recommended to His Excellency the above-mentioned Marshal, which is the Governor General Named Pasha in Baghdad. So as you can see, actually already before Baha'u'llah was exiled to Istanbul, it was already discussed that he should be exiled further, even to places such as Bursa, which is near Istanbul, and even to Edirne, which is at the fringe of European Turkey, if you will. So this was discussed already in 1863. And this is one of the things which is not mentioned in Baha'i history, in the Baha'i sources. So, and then we have Named Pasha, who was, as I said, the Governor General of Baghdad. He wrote a letter in 24 April 1863. It was the time when Baha'u'llah was in the Garden of Rezwan, preparing for his departure from Baghdad. So Named Pasha is asking in this letter, asking governors of the provinces through which Baha'u'llah and the other exiles would be passing to extend to them the utmost consideration and to make them reach Istanbul in good condition. Baha'u'llah should be given travel allowance of 25,000 piastres, that he may not suffer sore poverty. And here you see in the same file as this document, you see a list of male exiles in this communication by the governor of Baghdad, mentioning Baha'u'llah, his sons, and also servants, all male. Unfortunately, the female members of the entourage of Baha'u'llah are not mentioned by name. Now approaching, as Baha'u'llah left Baghdad, actually before he left Baghdad, let me come to this. Named Pasha, the Governor General, was one of the exceptional Ottoman ministers. He is called also the sheikh of the ministers in the late Ottoman Empire. He was extremely friendly towards Baha'u'llah, as you can see from this letter, where he says that he should be treated with utmost consideration, and that he and his followers should reach Istanbul in good condition. So Named Pasha was one of the friendly ministers, and he assigned also a cavalry of 10 soldiers for Baha'u'llah with provisions and with 50 mules, and as I said, a travel allowance, and so that Baha'u'llah would reach Istanbul safely. Baha'u'llah, as we know, spent 12 days in the Garden of Rezwan preparing for his departure and announcing his semi-official mission as the one whom God will make manifest. And so approaching Samsun, which Violetta mentioned recently in one of her presentations at the Black Sea, Baha'u'llah revealed probably his first tablet after he left Baghdad, the Lohe Hodaj or Samsun, Lohe Samsun. And this Hodaj or Hoda is actually what you see in the upper image. It was a litter on a mule or on a camel that was carrying especially women, or also sometimes Baha'u'llah when he wasn't riding. So this tablet of the Hoda or Hodaj, where Baha'u'llah says, these are verses, he begins with these verses. These are verses which were disclosed in the pavilion or tent of eternity and the Hoda of holiness at the moment when the greatest name arrived at the precinct of majesty in the land of Samsun, at the shore of a mighty ocean. And now, when Baha'u'llah usually uses these images in a spiritual sense, he also had these like in the material world. He had a tent, of course, where during the journey, during the journey he used. And so we have an interesting Ottoman document about Baha'u'llah staying near Samsun at the Black Sea, which basically says, after arriving, Hussein Ali Effendi rested in his tent for some days in the town of Samsun. So you have the spiritual image and also the material image of this tent in this Ottoman document. And then at the end it says, Baha'u'llah then boarded the imperial ship, Tuna, and departed for Istanbul. Now, Baha'u'llah being exiled in Istanbul, when Baha'u'llah arrived in Istanbul with his family and followers, they were lodged in a guest house and given a payment of 5,000 piasters allowance per month through the grace of His Majesty, the Sultan, and the expenses for the travel to Istanbul and to Edirne was to be reimbursed, since they were foreigners and powerless to manage to survive by themselves. This is a quote from this document. When Baha'u'llah arrived in Istanbul, he observed that the Minister of State did not care about the affairs of the people. So, as you know, Baha'u'llah mentions especially in the Surah of the Kings and the Surah al-Muluk, this behavior of the ministers of state, that they were only concerned with themselves. So Baha'u'llah, observing this, refused to follow the common custom of calling in person on Ottoman officials, such as the Sheikh al-Islam or the Prime or the Foreign Minister, and he refused the practice of mercenariness of Iranian dignitaries by asking for gifts. Some Ottoman officials disliked Baha'u'llah's behavior, and according to Shoghi Effendi, other officials tried to present the Babi exiles as the mischief to all the world, or deserving of every chastisement and punishment. In his Surah al-Muluk, Surah of the Kings, Baha'u'llah also rebukes Sultan Abdul Aziz and his ministers for having led an opulent life while their subjects were in a miserable state. There he advises the Sultan to follow the commandments of God and to act with justice towards his subjects, and not to allow anybody to oppress them, and to be a just king. And there are many also things which Baha'u'llah mentions, how Sultan Abdulaziz actually should handle the affairs of the state. And at some point he also says to the Sultan that he should not leave the affairs of state to the hand of others, particularly not to rely on his ministers who are not worthy of his trust, but on ministers who are upright and just, and to take counsel with them. Now, this taking counsel with them is a Quranic metaphor, which is about consultation, actually, as we know in the Baha'i faith. But in this case, this counseling with the others in state affairs was a key word in this Ottoman reform period, and was later used by the first generation of Ottoman reformers as a code word for a constitution and a parliament. In any case, Baha'u'llah advised the Sultan to counsel or to have consultations together with upright and just ministers. I will come to that in my next presentation on next Sunday. Now, the exile to Edirne, it's actually interesting that there are discrepancies between Baha'i sources and Ottoman sources, because we know that Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha say that they were exiled from Istanbul to Edirne all of a sudden without any forewarning. And so after these 4 months in Istanbul, the next edict, the next decree was issued by Sultan Abdulaziz to exile him to Edirne. And Baha'i sources state that this decision was reached as a result of the efforts of the Iranian ambassador in Istanbul on behalf of his government, in concert with Ali and Fuad Pasha, the prime and foreign ministers. And as regards to whether Baha'u'llah himself wanted to go to Edirne, as stated in the edict, or as Abdul Baha says, the government obliged us to settle in Adrianople. Shoghi Effendi states that through the Sultan's infamous edict, the Babis were banished suddenly and without any justification whatsoever, in the depth of winter and in the most humiliating circumstances to Edirne. So, but this document actually in the Ottoman archives says upon his, so Mirza Hussein Ali's or Baha'u'llah's written request to His Majesty, which is enclosed in the file and presented to the Sultan for permission to reside in Edirne, to be sent together with his family to Edirne. It's amazing. So, and then there's a list of the people and the animals or the mules that should accompany him. And so the Ottomans say that Baha'u'llah sent this list to Istanbul, and there's actually the seal of Baha'u'llah at the bottom, which says Hussein Ali, a seal that he used for official matters. So there's this discrepancy, as I said. And of course, one has always to compare the sources, what is right and what is wrong. And like Nahmet Pasha, the Governor General of Baghdad, the Governor of Edirne, Hurshid Pasha, also stated that Baha'u'llah did not constitute any danger to the empire, but he could not convince the authorities in Istanbul. So what basically happened is in Edirne, when Baha'u'llah arrived in Edirne, so they arrived in Edirne in December 1863, and in this period until the further exile to Akka in August 1868, many significant events occurred in the development of the Babi community in Edirne and in Iran. Here Baha'u'llah commenced the proclamation, the further proclamation of his claims on a global scale, as you know, by addressing various secular and religious rulers, including Sultan Abdulaziz, and then the conflict between Mirza Yahya and him that was already brewing in Baghdad reached its climax in Edirne. Baha'u'llah himself calls this supreme crisis as the days of stress and the most great separation. After this, most of the Babis followed Baha'u'llah and became known as Baha'is. And then the greeting also changed. The greeting of the Baha'is changed from Allahu Akbar to Allahu Abha in Edirne. And only a tiny minority sided with Mirza Yahya, who was known as Subh Azal, and who are known in history as the Azalis or Azali Babis. And according to the Baha'i version of events, Yahya's aversion to Baha'u'llah manifested itself in efforts to damage the reputation of Baha'u'llah in the eyes of the government, and even to bring about his death by poisoning him. The Ottoman government was not concerned about who was right or not. Anyone in the company of Baha'u'llah was deemed as a mischievous Babi. The events that actually led to the punishment of Baha'u'llah and Mirza Yahya and to the final exile to Akka and Cyprus commenced with the arrest of some Baha'u'llah's followers in Istanbul. And you can read it in the Revelation of Baha'u'llah of Adib Tahir Zaide about it in the volume about Istanbul and Edirne. So what basically happened is that Baha'u'llah had sent a few Baha'is from Edirne to Istanbul to sell some of his horses in order to secure some money. And there are documents issued in Edirne by merchants, including foreign merchants, who say that Baha'u'llah had borrowed money from them. And so it must be this occasion that Baha'u'llah sends these Baha'is to Istanbul to sell some of his horses in order to secure some money. And also the propagation of Mirza Yahya's claims, who was also somehow active in Istanbul, through his followers aroused the suspicion of the local authorities in Edirne, and the Governor General Hurşit Pasha received a report from Istanbul. They say that these factors, like this mischief of the Babis in Edirne, and certain expressions in writings of Baha'u'llah and Yahya confiscated by the Istanbul police, had alarmed the authorities. The governor of Edirne was asked to take precautionary measures in order that the Baha'is in Edirne do not disperse. They shouldn't leave Edirne. Like also the governor of Baghdad, Hurşit Pasha, as I said, he said that Baha'u'llah and his followers did not constitute any danger to the Ottoman state, but this did not have any effect in Istanbul. So the Baha'is who went to Istanbul, they were arrested by the police and cross-examined. This was between 31st of March to 7th of April 1868. Among them was Mishkin Kalam and Mirza Ali Sayyah, who both later were exiled to Cyprus. And this is just one of the sheets of the minutes of the interrogation, which is also mentioned by Mr. Taherzadeh in his book. And basically the questions of the officers at the police station in Istanbul when interrogating the Baha'is, they revolve around following issues. The reason for being in Istanbul or Edirne, so the reason for the Babis being in Istanbul or Edirne, to which religious group or religious order they belong to, who they were in contact with, who the Sheikh Effendi is, meaning Baha'u'llah, and the nature of their relationship, which religious order the Sheikh belongs to, the nature of his writings and claims, the relationship with Mirza Yahya and his claims, and all agreed, all the Baha'is who were interrogated, cross-examined, agreed with varying answers that Baha'u'llah did not claim to be the Mahdi, because that was the understanding of the Ottomans. The Ottoman Commission concluded from the confiscated voluminous writings that Yahya had copied the Quran and that he claimed that his writings were revealed to him by God. Based on this, Yahya claimed prophethood, and also Baha'u'llah, called here Sheikh Mirza Hussein Ali, received revelations in Persian and Arabic and claimed some sort of prophethood that also comprised the station of the Mahdi. But as we know, Baha'u'llah never claimed to be the Mahdi. That was the Bab. Baha'u'llah's own concept goes beyond the Islamic notion of prophethood, and he refers to himself in one of his writings, in many of his writings actually, as a divine manifestation, as you know, and says that he never claimed prophethood nor trusteeship, meaning that he was not a blood descendant of Muhammad and the Shia Imams. So this was the part of the Bab. So overall, Baha'u'llah was supported by the governor of Edirne, and Hurşit Pasha actually was another Ottoman statesman who openly and on many occasions frequented the house of Baha'u'llah and had admired Abdul Baha. He defended Baha'u'llah's views as expressed above, and affirmed that it was Mirza Yahya who created discord and was asked for by the Iranian government, that he arrived in Edirne together with Baha'u'llah, but secretly. And as in the case of the governor of Baghdad, the governor of Edirne as well had to submit to the will of Sultan Abdul Aziz. Initially, Baha'u'llah was to be exiled alone to Akka, but he insisted that he be accompanied by his family and followers. When he was told that the Sultan had refused, this is according to Baha'i sources, Baha'u'llah said to the major who was in charge, "What is the royal decree? The decree is my decree." Now go and send a telegram. Baha'u'llah refused and was reluctant to obey the Sultan due to the unjust situation. Subsequent to the report by the Prime Minister Ali Pasha, Abdul Aziz issued the edict in which he ordered a further exile of Baha'u'llah and his retinue. The memorandum, actually, I cannot do but mention, I mentioned the writings of Baha'u'llah and of Yahya in the Ottoman archives, hundreds of pages, probably 900 pages and sheets. And this one you see is in the handwriting of Baha'u'llah, that is kept in the Ottoman archives in Istanbul. And as I learned, this was also not at the Baha'i World Center, this one. And then there are many others. And as I said, based on these writings, they say that Yahya and Baha'u'llah claimed prophethood and so on, that they were the Mahdi. And then you have here other examples of the writings of Baha'u'llah. And on the left, you see, for example, a copy of the Rashia Amma, which is supposedly, or most probably, the very first revelation writing of Baha'u'llah in Iran. And on the right, you see a copy of the words of wisdom, which which are similar to the hidden words, and which are usually listed among the tablets revealed in Akka. But here we have the proof that it was already confiscated in Istanbul and was already probably revealed either in Baghdad, Istanbul, or Edirne. So in any case, the decree, the edict to Akka, it basically says that it touches on several points, saying both Mirza Yahya and Baha'u'llah claim prophethood or Mahdiship and divine revelation. Their perceived purpose, so the opinion of the Ottomans, was to deceive ignorant Muslims, multiply in number, and wage an armed insurrection against the Sultan or the Ottoman government. In order to prevent this, punishment needed to be given immediately. As a result of the statements of the interrogated persons, the Baha'is in Istanbul, and the letters and books in their possession, which were confiscated, it was clear that they belonged to the Babi sect. Baha'u'llah and Mirza Yahya deserved punishment in the first degree as the leaders of this mischief. Followers promoting their propaganda deserved second-degree punishment, and the other brothers and followers of Baha'u'llah would be punished in the third degree due to their allegiance to him or to Mirza Yahya. Since the phrase "those who ally" was not included in the specific law, all should have been punished with lifelong exile. Then the Ottomans say in this edict, however, since lifelong exile did not include imprisonment or did not ensure that the activities of the Babis and the dispersion to other places would be prevented, it was decided that they should be imprisoned in a citadel. So the activities of the Babis, both of Baha'u'llah and Yahya, were seen as destroying the public order and rebellion directed towards the state. That is, they committed armed rebellion or transgression based on an classical Islamic notion. According to Ottoman law, a group with different beliefs that is not organized and does not revolt is exempt from punishment. If they engage in propaganda, and Baha'u'llah had explicitly forbidden the propagation of his religion in the Ottoman realms. So if they don't engage in propaganda, if they engage in propaganda, they are cautioned, and if they violate, they are chastised according to the gravity of the offense. If they rebel against the state, or their aim is insurrection and public disobedience, meaning to create disorder, their punishment is execution. Although the Ottoman officials could have put Baha'u'llah and Mirza Yahya, who claimed prophethood, on trial on account of apostasy from Islam, falling off from Islam, the Ottoman state approached the matter politically. Instead of execution, they were punished with lifelong exile. It was stated that they claimed prophethood and intended an armed rebellion against the Sultan in the edict, and both groups, Yahya's and Baha'u'llah's, were punished for the latter offense. It was a political decision rather than religious that Baha'u'llah and Yahya were exiled to Akka. They say they were preparing an armed rebellion against the Sultan. Obviously, as a result of internal and external pressure, execution as punishment for apostasy was abolished during the reform period. In addition to this, the allowances of the Babis were stopped, but they received a daily salary. So Baha'u'llah's counsels to Sultan Abdul Aziz, as we know, had no positive effect. And in spring 1868, the Ottoman Emperor and his Prime Minister Ali Pasha and the Foreign Minister Fuad Pasha decreed that Baha'u'llah and Mirza Yahya and their families and companions be exiled. After Abdulaziz approved the decisions of the special commission that investigated the Babi question in Edirne, Baha'u'llah and his fellow exiles left Edirne for Akka in August 1868. Also, Yahya and his followers. And according to the official Baha'i view, that this decision was taken as a result of the schemes of Baha'u'llah's half-brother Mirza Yahya and his associates, who were constantly in contact with Ottoman officials. They were trying to bribe them. They sent false reports to Istanbul. Also in Edirne, they were creating some mischief. And also there's one interesting sheet in this collection, which I recently sent to Mr. Bijan Masumian. Maybe he can mention it. There is a sheet by Mirza Yahya having some calculations in a circle, and then some verses in Arabic and in Turkish, and all hinting to his official revelation in 1868. So, and he dispersed this sheet, did this propaganda in Edirne, and which aroused the attention of the Ottoman authorities. And with this also, Baha'u'llah was also punished. So now Baha'u'llah was exiled to Akka, and Mirza Yahya with his followers, and unfortunately 4 Baha'is to Famagusta in Cyprus, which was cut off from the mainland. So, and this decision, as we will mention later, as I will mention later, this decision of the Ottomans to send Baha'u'llah to Akka and Yahya to Cyprus would eventually prove favorable for Baha'u'llah and his followers. Yes, I won't go into the details what happened in Akka, but there's this one interesting letter by Abdul Baha from 1872 in the Ottoman archives. So about 3.5 years after the arrival in Akka, Abdul Baha sent a letter to the Ottoman Prime Minister, who was then Mahmud Nedim Pasha, describing the events and reasons for continuous banishments within the Ottoman Empire. So Abdul Baha basically writes in this Persian letter, about 3.5 years after the arrival in Akka, Abdul Baha sent, so this is like in my words, Abdul Baha sent a letter to the Ottoman Prime Minister describing the banishments. So an important issue that Abdul Baha mentioned in the letter and relates to the expulsion of the Babis from Baghdad is that of a tax issue. Abdul Baha says that the Iranian Babis in Baghdad had to pay, based on Ottoman rule and applicable to all foreigners, a certain tax called in Arabic the Sanfiya or Esnafiya in Turkish, a tax for artisans and tradesmen, and were ordered by Baha'u'llah to do so. Yet the Iranian consul, Mirza Buzurg Khan, deemed it improper and instigated his government against the Babis. This is Abdul Baha recounting this. After the rejection of this order by the Iranian consul, some Iranian citizens approached Baha'u'llah, who argued that the Iranians too should be included under this order, so meaning the non-Babi Iranians. This angered the consul, and consequently he initiated the harassment of the Babis, which in turn forced them to apply for the Ottoman citizenship. Then Mirza Hussein Khan, the Iran ambassador in Istanbul, strived and succeeded in removing the Babis from Iraq, as I mentioned. Regarding the deportation from Edirne, Abdul Baha wrote in the same letter that despite the friendly attitude of the people in Edirne, one day all of a sudden soldiers surrounded the house of Baha'u'llah, and after inquiring about the reason, they were told that it was decreed by the Sublime Porte, the Ottoman government, that they be sent to Gelibolu or Gallipoli. Consternation seized the Baha'i community after soldiers arrested Baha'u'llah and his followers, and therefore they were forced to leave Edirne. Abdul Baha adds that without understanding the reason, all the family and followers, counting 70 persons, were exiled to Akka, where they were incarcerated in the military barracks. Then after 1 month, he was surprised to read in an Ottoman newspaper that the Ottoman marshal of the police force received for this act the Lion and Sun Medal of the first class by the Iranian government. Abdul Baha further writes in his letter that the edict commanding the exile to Akka stated that he and Abdul Baha were interrogated in Istanbul, and upon being found guilty, they were exiled. This, of course, was contrary to the truth, because Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha were never present at the Sublime Porte for an interrogation. Abdul Baha also says in this letter that 3.5 years had passed since they had been in extreme wretchedness and abasement as prisoners in Akka. In spite of leaving Iran and arriving in the Ottoman Empire in utmost glory, and having been guests of the Ottoman state. He asked how a person who was in full glory and arrived at the Ottoman capital by an imperial order would end up as one abandoned and walled up within the ruinous prison of Akka with a daily allowance of 4 piastres. Their situation was so bad that he could not put it in words. Abdul Baha concludes their situation thus with an Islamic hadith. The 7 heavens and the 7 earths weep over the mighty people when they are brought low and the rich made poor. Abdul Baha hoped that the Ottoman Prime Minister would issue an edict of compassion to end the plight of the Baha'is in Akka. So, about the events in the ministry of Abdul Baha, I will refer in my next talk. Also refer to Ottoman documents about Abdul Baha. And if I may conclude, I haven't mentioned everything, of course, but I just want to give you what I see as an academic historical analysis of like a conclusion of my research that I base on Ottoman documents. So in my opinion, analyzing these documents, Ottoman and also Baha'i sources, if you will. So based more on the Ottoman perspective, 3 factors may have been decisive actually for the survival of the Baha'i religion in the Ottoman Empire. I mean, of course, we know that from the Baha'i point of view, which is sacred history, Baha'u'llah had to be in Akka, in the Holy Land, and you know, however, you know, whether exiled or not, so he fulfills prophecies, being in Baghdad, being in Akka, and so on. But like from a historical point of view, if you allow me, I would like to say these 3 things. So firstly, Baha'u'llah's instruction not to propagate his religion in the Ottoman Empire, his and Abdul Baha's approach of using discretion and wisdom in order not to endanger the safety of their followers, because the public image of the Baha'i community and its beliefs was that of a heretical Shi'i sect that deviated from Orthodox Sunni Islam. Factor 2, the overall tolerant attitude of the Sublime Porte of the Ottoman state in particular of influential Ottoman officials, such as governors, towards the Baha'is, and in contrast to the Iranian government and powerful Shi'i clerics. It is important to note that the fact that the Ottomans provided a safe refuge for the Baha'i leadership. Even though Baha'u'llah was exiled, he received allowances. As you have seen, he received travel allowance, he received pensions, be they monthly or daily. So with this, he and his community, if you will, the Baha'i community actually also survived. The third factor, the locations or places of exiles were crucial for the development of the Baha'i religion. Mirza Yahya was on the remote island of Cyprus with his family, and there's no evidence that he expanded the Babi community or spread his teachings. Conversely, even though Baha'u'llah was forcibly settled in Akka, that he viewed as a terrible place, with the impact of the Tanzimat reforms and the European infiltration, it became a center of economic activity, and the initial unfavorable conditions improved later. And my very last words for today, Baha'u'llah, as I mentioned, was already given Ottoman citizenship in Baghdad together with his family, and was so protected from being handed over to Iran, actually, by the governor of Baghdad. He received an allowance from the Ottomans as to survive. He was gradually able to meet his followers, even in Akka, where he was not supposed to mingle with other people, according to the edict. He could move inside and outside Akka. Later on, he lived as an exiled religious leader in mansions of former governors that he rented or bought. He had time to compose his voluminous writings and send followers to propagate his religion outside the Middle East that resulted in a worldwide religious community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this presentation. And what an interesting image at the end.
Yes, the Turkish professor.
We have to regretfully say that we're not going to have a question period today.
I'm sorry.
We're going to have to begin. No, it's fine. We're going to have to begin our questions next week. So we thank everyone who's had a question. We would like you to hold on to it. Please join the presentation next week. It's going to be available, the link to join, on clearwaterbaha'is.org. Again, clearwaterbaha'is.org is the place that we post the Zoom link. So all of you that have joined, some 40 or so of you have joined today. We welcome you again to please click on the link, join the Zoom. And of course, if you can't make it next week, but you still want to watch, we invite you to like and subscribe the video if you're on Facebook or YouTube. On YouTube, we have a really nice channel. It's available for everyone to share. Just share the link and your friends can join in on this presentation we just had. And what's more is that we're going to be talking not just next session, but we're going to have Dr. Nejati Alkan join us for more. And we're going to definitely be able to do a deeper dive in this content.
Thank you.
So again, Dr. Alkan, we thank you. It is a hard stop of 12:30, but we really wanted you to get that.
Thank you. I hope it wasn't too long.
No, not at all. We just wanted to get that conclusion out. We'll be having a presentation at 1 p.m. So everyone joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much again, Doctor. And we're
going to thank you all for joining.
Yes, we're going to close out. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye. See you.